Good morning, good evening, everyone. So today is October 6th and we have a developer meeting. In this session, we wanted to focus on Keptn Lifecycle Controller. So Thomas will do a demo and then we will have a quick discussion. So if you have missed, there is already a video published on YouTube with overview and a few demos embedded. Also, there is a repository with quick start guidelines. So I think this is starting materials for the presentation. And after that, we have a few topics from common agenda. So I'm not sure whether Brett joins or not. Last week, we had a discussion about Prometheus service. So we can discuss it. And then there is a bunch of demos for new developments. And yeah, Michael cited a topic for documentation. So I guess we have a quite packed agenda for today. So I suggest we start and see where we get. So Thomas, would you like to take over the Lifecycle Controller demo?
Yes. So yes, hello everyone. For everyone here who didn't see my demonstration on KubeCon, I will. Oh, sorry, on YouTube. I will do a short recap and a short description of what the lifecycle controller is, how it works, and in the end, how it looks like at the moment. So let's share my screen and let's take this one. Share. Okay, so when we are thinking about the lifecycle controller will be more or less an operator which resides in the Kubernetes cluster, in the Kubernetes cluster where workloads are operated. So you might have a GitOps controller like Flux or Argo CD, but also some manual work or a pipeline with kubectl which applies something on your Kubernetes cluster. And on the Kubernetes cluster, you have your Keptn Lifecycle Controller, which takes care about the lifecycle of your application or workloads. So when we are thinking of typical Kubernetes applications, these applications are not only, mostly not only consisting of one workload or deployment, stateful set or whatever. They are mostly consisting of multiple workloads. And in the end, we want to know if the whole application works and if the whole application is tested properly. So what you see here is kind of a sandwich with what our lifecycle controller does. So our lifecycle controller is capable of doing executing pre-deployment tasks. Then it lets Kubernetes do the deployment. And after we find out that the pods are technically healthy or the workloads, then we will do the post-deployment. And our lifecycle controller adds observability to the whole process. So what we see in this window is that we get a full trace of the deployment. Furthermore, we will get some metrics such as how often has this workload or application has been deployed, how long did it take, and how often did it fail. And furthermore, we are also issuing events on everything we are doing. So, for instance, if the pre-deployment phase of a workload or an application is finished, then we will issue a Kubernetes event, and therefore it will also be better observable in the future. The second part of the lifecycle controller standardizes some kind of task execution. So when you annotate your workload with our Keptn annotations, and we will take a closer look on this afterwards, you are able to execute at the moment functions, which we'll also see in the demonstration afterwards. This could also be containers and CLIs, and in the end, we could also trigger external control planes like Keptn is at the moment via cloud or CD events. What we see on the lower part of this slide is that that in the end, the lifecycle controller will start pre-deployment checks based on the application in the first step, Afterwards, it might do pre-deployment tasks and post-deployment tasks based on the workload. And in the end, after all of the workloads are deployed, it will trigger post-deployment checks of the application. At the moment, we are focusing on the workload part, so we can do pre-deployment and post-deployment tasks based on the workload. Okay, and now I think I've talked enough. Let's take a closer look on what this means technically. And therefore, I'm currently in our Lifecycle Controller repository, and there are some examples, for instance, the potato head deployment in there. And what you see here is that we got a typical Kubernetes manifest, which consists of a namespace, deployments, services, and so on. And what we did to instrument this with our lifecycle controller is we added some annotations to, for instance, to the potato head entry deployment, where we say this belongs to the app potato head. This belongs to the workload potato head entry and is in the version 0.10. And the most important part for today's demo is that we also annotated that we want to use the post-deployment hello task as a post-deployment task. Furthermore, I added an init container to this deployment that we see that our post-deployment checks are working. Furthermore, I also added a second pre-deployment task for the other services, which checks for the entry service to be available before deploying the service. So this is a very, very simple solution in this case, where we simply wrote a TypeScript function. Just a second. Which simply checks if an HTTP endpoint is available before we start the deployment. And what you see here is a typical function we can use inside of the Keptn Lifecycle Controller to execute some tasks up front. And exactly this script will also be used in our task definition. So what we have seen in our pre and post deployment tasks here are names of Keptn task definitions, and the task definition for that is also specified in this repository. So it also gets deployed with the workload you have. For instance, what you saw here is that we have the check of the entry service, and what we can do is we can share such functions. So we can post them on a web server. In our case, this is hosted on GitHub, and you can only add parameters to this. So for instance, we said that we want to query on this URL to find out if the service is running. The second thing we could do, and this is demonstrated in the post-deployment tasks, is we could also have these functions inline. This is only a Slack. This is a simple Slack function which posts something to a Slack channel, and this gets showed more into depth in the YouTube video. Okay, and with all of the things we have in there, I think we have everything we need to deploy this service. In the future, it might also be able to run post-deployment analyses and so on. So the things we know from Keptn at the moment, that we can trigger slow evaluations and find out if the application is really working. As I said, this is one of the first prototypes at the moment. Okay, so I am in the repository now. I have exactly the same configuration as we seen in the Git repository on the left upper side. On the right upper side, I watch the pods which get created on the Kubernetes cluster. And on the lower side, I have the Keptn workload. I have a list of the Keptn workload instances. And they describe a certain version of a workload which is deployed on the environment. So I will simply do a kubectl apply -fn dot. And we should see that a lot is happening now. So this is a bit. So we see that our pre-checks got started, and we also see that they are erroring at the moment, and this is okay because as long we are taking over the behavior of Kubernetes to re-trigger tasks as often as it's necessary. And try to make this a bit smaller so that you see more. We also see that we have the services down here, and we also see that the potato head entry has started now. And after this has been started and is running, we trigger the post-deployment check, and this is completed now. What we also see is now that this is running, all of the other jobs are completed now. And after some time, all of the other pods should go to a running state. Yes, so now they are created, and after some time, so the potato head is very fast, starting very fast. They are all running. And what we're seeing in the workload at the moment is the status of all of this. And we see that, for instance, for our potato head entry workload, the pre-deployment, deployment, and post-deployment is succeeded, as it is for every other service. We could also try to update one of these applications. And for instance, let's say we use the, let's say we use the entry service again. Then let's simply apply this. And we see that a new version gets created here. We also see that the pre-deployment has already passed. The deployment is pending. Hopefully this gets scheduled in a few seconds. And afterwards, this should also be finished. For some reason, this takes a bit longer, but yes, this should not hold us back. Okay, so this was more or less the demonstration of all of this. What we are dealing with at the moment are mainly the observability parts. So for instance, doing adding enhancing the trace. At the moment, I think there's only the webhook instrumented. Furthermore, I saw a pull request where the first metrics are created. I'm not sure if this is already merged. And yes, furthermore, we will add some application awareness to all of this so that we can do application pre and post deployment checks. And yes, with all of this, we will do some demonstrations on KubeCon and try to find out how this, if this is something people need, and if there are use cases we didn't think of at the moment, because with all of this function and execution part, we can do lots of things. And yes, I think that's it from my side. Oleg, do you have something to add at the moment?
No, it looks pretty good. I had a few comments, rather questions, but yeah, no content-wise. One question is rather about security matters. So for Keptn functions, when you download from URL, it would be quite important to have support for checksums or whatever, because otherwise, yeah, it's basically unreliable, especially for external URLs like GitHub demoed today.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be nice to add it for the scope, even for the initial delivery, because once we have any kinds of security audit, it will be brought up.
Yes, so at the moment we are at the very early prototyping phase.
Yeah.
There are some things we have to add, especially for the GPG keys or whatever, to find out that what we execute is exactly the things we expect to.
Yeah, and what is the general vision for functions? So from wearing my community hat, there are many existing FAS standards, including OpenFAS, etc. So do we introduce something new, or or do you just consider it as a very small engine for Keptn needs?
At the moment, from the current perspective, it's just a simple thing to execute something for the prototype. We might also have we and also maintainers of other projects might have also the possibility to add their own things inside of in all of the things we are doing here. Am I still here? So at the moment, we only implemented functions to have something in the prototype. But for instance, it might also be possible to say, yes, I do not want only to execute functions. I, for instance, want to trigger a cloud event or trigger an event in directive or some other tool. So it only depends on the integrations. So if there is someone who integrates other functions like, let's say, Knative functions or whatever, this should not be the big problem.
Yeah.
And we could also use such things.
So basically, for us, functions is a way to synchronize particular actions and also, well, just a small scripting engine.
At the moment, it is exactly this way, yes. One of the next things I plan to do is to add some things as containers so that you can execute, for instance, a kubectl or an Argo rollout or whatever inside of a task definition. So this would make some use cases a bit easier.
Yeah.
But at the moment, implementation-wise, this is very open.
Yeah, for containers, I think it should be still remain lightweight.
Yes.
Because we don't want, I believe we don't want to use containers as a way to implement a pipeline engine at the moment.
No, but for instance, for some things, there are tools which you might want to execute in your delivery, so in your deployment mechanism, and therefore sometimes it makes.
Definitely. We need to find ways to the border for easy and when you go to external engine. But yeah, it's difficult for any orchestration system. Yeah, so regarding the rest, yeah, well, I've seen the demo on YouTube too, and thanks a lot for preparing it and for all other content. So yeah, I think this project is going really well, and it's interesting to see where it goes next. So we have quite a lot of people on the call. Does anyone has additional questions and feedback?
I wanted just to highlight the fact that now the roadmap is public. So you can follow there at the GitHub project that I put in the document. And we are very open to any kind of feedback from the community. So don't be afraid to write any discussion post or comment to the issues.
And I believe the project is Hacktoberfest enabled. So Thomas spent some time. We have good first issues also. So if anyone wants to try and play with it, I think it's a good opportunity. So I think that's it with the demo, unless somebody has other topics. And yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. And yes, it works on key 3, yes. Confirmed. On Windows too.
Also on ARM.
So you do have ARM, or is it just MacBook?
We have ARM
Yes,
images.
so I'm using a M1 Mac with Kind, and we wanted to disable the ARM build, and afterwards I couldn't start the lifecycle controller on my Kind cluster. So yes, we are also running on ARM.
It's nice.
The only thing which is to mention at the moment, this is limited to a Kubernetes cluster larger than 1.25, I think, so higher than 1.24, sorry. and it doesn't work on vCluster. But that's also more or less by nature. But otherwise, everything we tested works until at the moment.
I guess the only real limitation for that is being able to run in public clouds, which haven't updated to the recent Kubernetes versions. But yeah, by the time it reaches the production state, I believe that everything will be updated anyway.
And 124 is already available everywhere, basically.
Yeah, just hit 125. So yeah, this is why 124 is, I believe it's 6 months old, right? Okay. So I guess then we move to the next topic. So Brett McCoy, he's not on the call, I guess. So I can just summarize what is this topic about for those who haven't watched previous meeting. So there is an issue in Prometheus service. So basically it stopped working with Kube Prometheus stack, which is a default distribution. So the feature request was that actually adjusting Prometheus operator, adjusting the service to be able to work with Prometheus operator too. Again, this is a feature request, so I don't think that it's something that would be prioritized right now. But yeah, just for your information, it impacted Brad, who plays with operators, and I guess for any of you the experiments, for example, what Kiratech is doing for Crater platform ops, it might be also a problem. But yeah, so it's just so Brett wanted to discuss it in deep, just to see whether he could contribute, and if so, how we could assist. So since Brett is not here, we could probably take it offline in the chat. But yeah, if anyone is interested in Prometheus operators or has experience with that, I think that it could be a good enhancement for the service. And yeah, basically, yeah, I'm not sure that this could be included in the LTS, at least not now. But yeah, so if someone is interested to collaborate, we can work on including it in the future. So this is all for this part. And yeah, Giovanni is the next one.
Okie dokie, thank you. So, how can I do the sharing? I had to install Firefox to be able to connect to this meeting.
Sounds modern.
Okay, now you should be able to see the agenda, right? Perfect. So the first ticket I would like to highlight is that we finally remove high charts, and we fully switch to D3 for Keptn. So now all the graphs are being rendered with a new fancy library, D3, which boosts the performance, so the response time of the page, and we can get rid of a lot of old code for high charts. This old library that we were not able to update due to paywall for any update. So now it's not supported anymore. Then for the lifecycle controller observability, I wanted to show that now we can also have spans automatically exported by the operator. For this, I wanted to show also a small demo, but I need to change then the sharing. I think, yes. Okay. So here you can see I'm connected to my cluster. I'm monitoring the logs of the operator. And if I switch shell and try to apply the single service example that we have in our lifecycle controller examples list, the operator now, here it is, automatically prints out spans for the whole lifecycle. Oops. The auto scroll is on. The whole life cycles. You can see here that two spans have been created. The first one is the webhook that annotates the pod. Here we see is the one that starts the trace because there is no parent span ID and contains all the important attributes, the Keptn deployment, app name, workload, version, and so on and so forth. And then we also have a second span that is mixed with different logs, where it's a child span that also contains these attributes and represent the fact that the webhook is now creating Keptn custom resources. In this case, the webhook creates a Keptn workload. So if you look at the workloads, and I create it in the default namespace, and we describe it, we can see that this CRD is annotated with a trace parent. So at the moment, we propagate the trace context via annotations. But in the future, we will be following up on this. And instead of using annotations, we most likely do custom resources also for this. So visibility and observability of the wall operator is a priority.
One question. So for trace parent, is it possible to pass it in the initial event? So basically the one which triggers Keptn for evaluation.
At the moment, I configure it to have a full-fledged. Oh, the webhook always starts the trace, but it would be very easy to remove that flag. And if already is there, we try to extract it and continue the trace.
Yeah, it would be super helpful for complex dependencies.
We can have that, yes.
For instance, we could pass it also over to external integrations. So for instance, if we issue some CD events or whatever, we could add this trace parent. And therefore we could also get a trace
propagated trace
via tools.
Yeah, for event-based system, it's super important because it's the only way to troubleshoot if something goes wrong.
Yes, so as long as we are triggering event-based executors or whatever, as long as this is possible. On the other side, if we are triggered by GitOps tools, this might get a bit more interesting. Because then we would need to get it in the manifests which are applied on the.
That's nice. Thank you.
Now Giovanni is frozen.
Oh, looks so.
That I'd like to discuss is that can you still know? Please.
Things happen. So this is what happens when you try to talk about documentation.
Okay, I'm back.
I heard that,
I will not share the screen anymore. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, I wanted just, well, anyway, the link is in the public document. Go over the documentation, please. If we need to enhance some sections or if something is not fully clear, just let us know and we will try to do our best to improve the documentation.
Yeah, actually, while we have one question to the team, do we want to automatically delete closed branches?
I would say yes.
Yes.
Plus 100. Okay. I'll clean up the open branches later. Okay. Do you want me to show the next pull request?
No, it's not necessary to show. I wanted just to say that we are trying to follow as much close as possible the OpenTelemetry semantic conventions. And we have in the plan also to contribute back semantic conventions for the deployment life cycles, since OpenTelemetry has a blind spot on this topic.
So you want to contribute it directly to the OpenTelemetry project? Or?
Yes.
Okay. It would be nice.
And with that, I think my internet was stable enough so far. So Philip, take the chance to go ahead before I disappear again.
All right, thank you. I'll just share the screen real quick. Can you hear me this time? I think it should be working. All right. Starting off with the bootstrap of the CI pipeline for the lifecycle. This one's pretty straightforward, so I have just a quick example here from our main branch. It starts off with the prepare CI run step, where we evaluate the change files of the project, so it wouldn't execute the whole matrix for all those modules if not all files have changed. This is just for performance. And after that step, we have the compile step, where we just try to compile the module, and parallel to that, we execute the unit tests. And if those two steps are completed, we build and push our Docker images. And after the images are built and pushed, we create our manifest files and attach them to the CI run here. So if developers, for instance, want to test their changes, they simply have to download the manifest file and can easily apply it to their clusters. The next one is introducing Go and Yarn caching for the CI pipeline of Keptn. So this one is also pretty straightforward. Here in the setup steps for Go and respective down here for Yarn, we just cache the dependencies and define a key for the cache, so it can be easy to restore if nothing has changed. And last but not least, we have a research ticket regarding the Go vulnerability checker here. So I did a quick POC and tested the vulnerability checker. I also found that it's not a real replacement for Snyk itself, since Snyk is also usable for different security scans, also for Node. For instance, Go vulnerability checker only checks for Go modules, like the name implies. So I created a follow-up ticket to introduce the Go vulnerability checker for our pipeline, and it can also be scheduled for like once a week or so. And it's a pretty nice tool, since it's not only scanning for dependencies that have vulnerabilities, but it scans if the code actually invokes vulnerable parts of those vulnerable packages. So you could easily depend on vulnerable packages as long as you don't invoke any vulnerable paths within the package. You're basically good to go. So with that being said, I think I'll hand over to Moritz.
Thanks. I will just show one thing today, and that's the Klc Release Pipeline. We already actually have it open already. We already created the first preview release, basically, with the first features of the Lifecycle Controller, thanks to this pipeline. And we actually switched away from the process that we had in the Keptn main repository, where we used standard version as a release helper tool. And now we're using release please, which comes with a nice GitHub action that basically takes care of the release for us. Also versioning, also changelog generation, and GitHub releases and tagging and stuff like that. So this is much simplified, basically. This will do the release, and the rest is just building our images, building the manifests for the operators, or for the operator, and then attaching it to that release. So that's super cool, very straightforward. And the cool thing is you always get a preview of the changelog for your next release. So we already have some stuff merged that's gonna land in the next version of the lifecycle controller. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's basically all I wanted to show already. So with that, I'm handing over to Andre.
Thanks. I'll share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing it. Yeah, other don't have much to present, as most of the things were already presented by Thomas. Just a few minor things. In the last days, we introduced a new bug fix for the shipyard controller in Keptn, noding Keptn Lifecycle Controller. The thing was that in the update project API endpoint, there was not possible to update anything without specifying the Git credentials. Otherwise, the Keptn will scream that you should specify the credentials. Yeah, with this fix, the fix was basically about disabling the validation of the Git credentials in update endpoint when they are not present. Yeah, for example, now it is possible to update only the shipyard controller, shipyard YAML file without specifying the Git credentials if there is no need to update them. Yeah, and the second thing, which was not part of the presentation by Thomas, that recently we added metrics to the Keptn Lifecycle Controller. Basically, this will now we can see the active task, active deployments, number of all deployments, all tasks, and the duration of the task. If you can go for the pull request, you will see what was made, and the result looks like this, which will be further processed by other tools. Here we have some histograms regarding the duration, active tasks, active deployments, number of active task, and so on. Are there any questions regarding this? I guess no, so I'm heading over to Mac.
Okay. I just want to run by everybody something I'm thinking about doing before I do it, and everybody goes, oh my God, she's lost her mind, undo it fast, which would be a nightmare. Original plan, we had hoped that we were going to be able to release the LTS docs under Docusaurus. It doesn't look like that's going to be possible. We're hoping that we may be able to silently do that soon afterwards. The plan was when we go to Docusaurus, since we will have true versioning for the docs, that we will get rid of these subdirectories for each release, which are kind of a mess. I can see how they worked at one time, but pretty much, let's face it, we're just copying them over, and that's the end of it. And it's a nightmare maintaining the cross-references because there's a lot of cross-references from those top-level sections like concepts and now installation, which I probably moved too quickly. So My proposal is that for LTS, we do that restructuring, that we pull everything up. So what is currently under 0.19, so we'll have operate and manage and define and all that other good stuff will be at the same level as concepts and installation when you look at the landing page on the docs. It does, the biggest nightmare I think about is the update piece. And I've already rewritten the updates to have generic, this is how you update, and then we can have subsections for details. And I put, to cover us for the time being, I've got a little table that links to the release note for I think we have the last 3 releases or something showing, but there is a table that goes back all the way as far as we've got in the source for every release, with a link to the release notes and a link to the upgrade instructions, even the subpoints. But there's a lovely table so they can get to that. And will be anything else we do. I think it's just general. Let's face it, if people are looking at 3 different releases, they don't read 3 different releases of documentation. They look at one. So we want to make sure that we will say such and such, you have to do this in 0.16 and later or whatever. So we'll do that within content. Does anybody see any major problems with that? It's a little bit of a kludge, but I think it's a short time kludge. It will also mean, because we were anticipating having to do that restructuring at the same time that we ported the content over to Docusaurus. So we were going to have all of those XREFs to deal with. This means I'm going to have a few excruciating days before LTS, but then it will be done. And when we go to Docusaurus, it will be a straight, the structure will remain identical. And I think that's going to be a good thing for us. I have a little bit of a concern. I have seen a couple of times popping up when I've had a CI failure. I'm getting a nasty little message about that leads me to think that we may have to do a whole lot of upgrade to get Hugo to work after mid-November. I'm not quite sure. And the next time I get it, I'm going to copy the message and send it to people who know it. But this would reposition. We have almost got, we don't have all the features we want in Docusaurus, but I think we are very close to where we could put out sort of a kludge version of the docs under Docusaurus. And if we were faced with that versus reconstructing everything we're doing with Hugo, we might want to go that way. So this is my proposal. Does anybody object?
I would rather object about moving all the documentation to the top level. Because if we talk about Keptn V1, which is basically Keptn LCS, in the future there might be new major releases. Then with our LCS policy, it means that the previous releases would be supported for longer time. And once you move all the documentation to the top level, you're basically heading into the trouble with maintaining documentation baselines like we do now with minor releases. So you would get the same for major releases in the future. So my preference would be to still have a folder or whatever, like 1.txt, where all the documentation is aggregated.
So it still appears to the like it does now, and still have this made so Docusaurus to deal with all of those really specific cross references.
Oh, well, my expectation would be, so at least what is in the current LCS proposal, that we have this version, which is maintained for a long time. So I wouldn't expect us to see documentation copy and paste every month like we had before.
Right.
So it should be much more stable in these regards. So
But it
basically,
means the fixing those cross references is going to be part of the cutover to Docusaurus, which is going to remove our ability to, at any point, to make a quick move to Docusaurus.
probably, but so currently our problem that we have some documentation on the top level and some documentation on the version level, right?
Right.
So what we actually follow your suggestion, but a bit differently, we put all the documentation under 1.x. So for example, references, etc., all we extracted to the top. We could just use this top under one.txt so that all the documentation is centralized, and within it, all cross-references are fixed. So there will be no problem for further migration. And if
Wait a minute. So you're going to put reference to the same level as concepts,
yeah,
but not manage and operate and all of that stuff?
Yeah, let me show it to you. So again, so there is documentation. So currently we have snapshots for minor releases. And also we have some items like concepts, installation, etc. On the top level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we basically have two options. So one option, as you proposed, to get rid of this folder and to move everything to the top, right? Alternative option is to have something like one.txt, where we put, let's say, installation, concept, quick start, maybe even explore, and it remains under one.txt as a version we gradually improve, which is solid with regards to cross references, and it keeps evolving. So basically, we have the same top root, but under one.txt instead of the top level.
So when the user comes, they don't see anything except the list of old releases.
Well, we can actually send them to one.txt root by default.
Okay.
So why I wonder about that? So again, from the user experience standpoint, so let's say now we have Keptn one.txt. We also have two projects which would be eventually a part of the documentation. So one is Keptn Lifecycle Controller, let's say something like that, and another one. So there is like Keptn Lighthouse. So if we assume that there are multiple documentation routes, so for Keptn itself and for sub-projects which are not strictly Keptn, maybe it makes sense to support it on the root level. What do you think?
I don't know. It's a possibility. I guess the other question, and we don't have any answer, is how long till we're going to be able to switch to Docusaurus? How long are we going? Assuming that it was still sort of a short time, but I was thinking about the possibility that we could release under Docusaurus even if we had not come up with the perfect design and the CSS that supports it and all that. I was still hoping that we might get to Docusaurus sooner rather than later.
I think we need to look into that. So for me, the biggest blocker is support for external repositories, because once it's done, we are much more flexible.
Right.
So,
but that is, and we still, but that is an additional feature. I'm thinking of the possibility of getting under Docusaurus with the equivalent of what we currently have now.
I would vote against it because it would be double migration. So my proposal is actually to look into Docusaurus and what we need to finish it. We had a discussion with Rajiv. As he presented last week at GSOC demos, there is a bunch of scripts for external repository support. So he basically went ahead and tried implementing, let's say, his own GitHub action for assembling things, which is one of legit ways to handle the obstacle. So I think that before we commit to moving existing content to Docusaurus, just to rework it later, we need to see whether we could move to the final solution right away. Yes, sorry, I've got a distractor.
And what if this means we have to do major retooling in November to continue to support Hugo?
I don't think we will need major retooling. So I agree with your idea that basically it makes sense to centralize everything under the same roof.
At the same level,
I think maybe this level should support extension in the future on the top level. So yeah, instead of putting everything on the top level right away, we reserve one additional level so that we can include more documentation sources, let's say for sub-projects and new major versions in the future.
Okay. And so that's going to mean then we're going to have to make some adjustments because that's going to make changes to the main landing page for docs. Or you're going to make the main landing page for docs right now to be the LTS docs.
I think yes. So for users, we can make it simple. Yeah, I can put a redirect there, and then we tackle the rest.
What does everybody else? I can live with either one.
Yep.
Obviously, when we get to Docusaurus and have versioning, well, not because you're saying now that even with versioning, we're not going to want to land at the current docs. We're going to want to land above the Keptn docs. So because we'll have other.
Could you please wait for 5 minutes?
Mort, Giovanni, you know this stuff better than I do. Does that all sound? What sounds good to you guys?
I would say maybe let's do a follow up on this because there are pro and cons.
I couldn't fully follow now, honestly.
Okay, so we take it offline.
Okay.
Yeah, we will sync with Mac and come with a proposal how we do that.
And one more question. Do we know what the tree is going to be named? Is it, I mean, we said it's virtually 0.20, but when we tree,
I think we agree.
Is it going to be LTS? Is it going to be 1.0.0?
Yeah, so I suggested just call it 1.x so that if we ever, we want to release backports eventually, but we won't be releasing new documentation baselines anyway from user standpoint, unless it's strictly needed. So let's say we have versions 1.1 and 1.2. Unless it's strictly needed to document, we just stick to the same documentation package.
Okay.
Without copying, without maintaining forks, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very likely that we don't need bigger documentation changes with 1.0, since most likely it would actually not even be 1.1 or 1.2, but rather 1.0.1. Since it is an LTS release, it's going to be mostly bug fixes and security stuff.
Hard to guarantee at the moment, but yeah. So even if there is 1.1, I do not think that the deviation of changes will justify having a new baseline.
And I would maintain that we shouldn't be expecting our users to do, if there's one sentence changed in one section, I shouldn't have to read through 2 whole sets of docs to find that. I should have been reading that section. It should tell you, by the way, if you're using 1.0.1, you're going to have to do it this way. And if you're using 1.2.1, you're going to have to do it this way or whatever that needs to be. Hopefully, most of that will be covered in reference pages where we actually have a whole differences between versions section. But we'll be working that in content. So, yeah. Okay, cool. We will, if anybody else thinks about this and has more thoughts, feel free to chime in on Slack and we'll figure it out.
Okay. So then we are taking it offline.
Yes.
Thanks, Mike, for bringing this topic up. I added another topic about enabling tasks list alpha, but taking the time, I will also move to the chat. And I guess it's rather interesting for those who manages tickets, tries to implement epics on GitHub and other things. So it's either offline or the next community meeting.
But for me, it's a big plus for task list.
Okay, so yeah, I'll drop the proposal. I can just quickly show it. Well, we have 2 minutes, so probably it's enough. Well, where is it? Okay, so basically, yesterday we had a meeting with GitHub. They introducing new alpha feature for visualization of tasks, etc. So basically, the idea is to have even more capabilities right inside GitHub interface, including grouping of tickets, automatic referencing, providing some metadata in the visualization. And it's an alpha feature. Basically, it would be hidden behind task list macro, so it won't be enabled by default. But if we agree to participate, we can play around with such layouts and provide feedback to GitHub. Kubernetes already enabled it, so they have a document with their notes, but generally they are positive about the feature. So I think for us it would be also quite interesting to try it out, especially since we try to move a lot of project management to GitHub at the moment. So, any objections from the team to have yet another feature under the feature flag? It's not an objection. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically, this is what I wanted to present, and yeah. If nobody is against, I will just post it to the Slack, and if everyone agrees, I will roll it out. Just for the sandbox at the moment. Okay. So yeah, that's it, and yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. Yeah, so I will get the video published maybe within 1 to 2 hours, so no need to wait if you want to share the demo with others. Okay. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.